All right, so right now we're going to be doing the record collection basic JavaScript challenge from freeCodeCamp. So you are given a JavaScript object notation object representing a part of your musical album collection. Each album has a unique ID number and its key, and several other properties. Not all albums have complete information. You start with an update records function, this function right here, which takes an object like collection, this object right here, an ID, a prop or a property like artist or tracks, artist and tracks right here, and a value. Complete the function using the rules below to modify the object passed to the function. So our first rule is your function must always return the entire object. So they have done that for us right here. Inside of our function, we have return object. And our second rule is if property isn't tracks and value isn't an empty string, update or set that album's property to value. So let's do that right now. Oh, excuse me. If our prop is strictly unequal to tracks, and so there are two conditions which must be fulfilled here, and our value is strictly unequal to an empty string, so if our prop isn't tracks and our value isn't an empty string, we need to update or set that album's property to value. So we need to access our upper level object, go inside of an album, and set that property to value if these conditions are fulfilled. So our function must update or set that album's prop to value. So we need to access our object. We then need to access our album, which is ID. We then need to access our property and assign it the value. So our function is now in line with our second rule. Let's move on to our third. We need to add an else if statement with the following conditions. If prop is tracks, so if our property is strictly equal to tracks, but the album doesn't have a tracks property, so we need to add our another condition right here. So if the album does not have a tracks property, so if object ID using the has own property method, has own property, prop is strictly equal to false, so if that property does not exist within our album, we need to create an empty array and add a value to it. So object ID, we need to create that property in our album and create an empty array with our value inside. So now our function goes in line with our third rule, Let's move on to our third. Else if our property is tracks, or if our property is strictly equal to tracks, and our value is not an empty string, we need to add value to the end of the album's existing tracks array. So we need to access our object, then our album, then our property, which would be tracks. And if our value is not an empty string, we need to update our tracks array with our value. So we can use push for that. Simply push in our value into our existing tracks array. And finally, our last else if statement. if our value is strictly equal to an empty string, then we need to delete the given prop property from the album. So we need to delete our object ID prop. And I believe our function is now complete. So let's run the test and see if we are correct. And yes, we are. Thank you for watching.